Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace. So I'm coming on late today because technology is not working for me right now. So we're going to do things a little bit different on the intro. I don't have my teleprompter. I don't have my script. My laptop is on my trash can. My desktop isn't working, but we are going to do this show because I can't wait to talk to Brandon. We are going to be talking about his latest book, And So by Fire. Welcome. Thank you to our show, and thank you for joining us. I want to do a quick shout out to our top sponsors. Ray, Ruth, Michelle, Kirsten, Heidi, thank you all so much. You guys keep me going and support me more than you know. If you would like to support the show, go to sherrypalace.com, and there you will have tons of ways to support it, including only $3 a month, where it gets you access to our VIP afterwards, where you can come on camera and talk one-on-one with our guests. It's awesome. It's only $3. Join me. So we are going to be talking with Brandon. Again, I don't have my teleprompter. I don't know what I'm supposed to be saying. So if you are on Facebook, grant StreamYard access. If you are on YouTube, like, subscribe, share with all of your friends, all of that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome Brandon now, because again, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be saying, so I want to talk to him. Brandon is an amazing person, and I am so honored to hear and talk to him. Hi, Brandon.
Well, you do really good on the fly, and you know, I don't know if there's ever been a better introduction than he's just an awesome guy. So
there you go.
I'll take it. That's incredible.
How are you? I'm so glad we get a chance to talk about your book today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And I'll tell you that it's amazing, especially on social media, when you know so many people by face and you've never officially met them. And you and I have been in the same virtual space for years, and we've never officially talked. So it's really cool. And really cool to talk and chat and all that stuff. So
we finally get this opportunity. And I'm honored that you even came on. Hey, Brent, how are you?
Good. The fire looks warm. It's apropos to the title of the book. So yeah.
Brent agrees that you're an awesome guy.
I've actually met him in person, so
yeah,
good to see Brent.
He might be a little bit biased. So tell me, what was the impetus of this book? It's a second to your other one.
It's a sequel to What Can't Be Hidden, and What Can't Be Hidden is an allegorical novel. And honestly, I was on another podcast recently, and I was like, the real difficulty is trying to market these novels. I think marketing fiction is difficult anyway, but whenever you're trying to nail down the genre, these books, both of them together collectively, are contemplative fiction, in some sense kind of quasi science fiction, but not too much. It's just really good page turning fiction, so thriller like. And so trying to nail down a genre is difficult. But around 2019, and this is just I feel like a great part of the story, is that I had been feeling that everything had become so divided and polarized in our country that anytime that I would write anything at all, whether that be a blog post, just even a social media post, everything was so polarized that people would just either completely agree or completely disagree. There was no gray, there was no contemplation, there was nothing in between. And I was just becoming very, I'd just say sad, I think, because I thought for myself, where my writing has always been about trying to engage people to take a step forward, one click forward, growing the spirit, it was very disheartening to get people dismissing it before they even knew what I was talking about, assuming that I was taking a particular ideological stance. And I thought, I've never really been interested in perpetuating an echo chamber. That's never been my shtick. Mm-hmm. I really would like to challenge people across the board, but in light of that, I thought, I just had this fleeting moment where I thought, fiction might be a really good avenue where you can explore the same ideas and do it very covertly, under the radar, subversively. And I thought it seemed like a great idea because you can put into flesh and blood, you can put into a person where they're dealing with things emotionally and thinking through things and working through gray areas. And you can understand the nuance of how they've arrived at a position, and you can kind of wrestle with them in that. And so there was something really appealing about that to me, but I thought it's one thing to have an idea to do fiction. It's another thing to have an actual story.
Yeah.
I didn't have one. And I think almost everybody knows at this point that kind of this bizarre moment happened in the summer of 2019. I was just starting to mow. I had taken a couple of swipes, and I just had this moment, this like vision of a circle with a line through it. And I stopped. I'm like, why am I having, I'm not a big vision guy. I'm very non whatever. And I stopped and I thought, this kind of symbolizes like an island, its wholeness, its completeness, its shalom. And this line is like this fracture in it. And from that, I just started having this idea. At that moment, I stopped mowing. I grabbed my phone and I just started taking notes about these people on an island. And there is, it's allegorical. So it's much of the things that we see here in terms of, say, religious fundamentalism. This is the first book, What Can't Be Hidden, religious fundamentalism, and one person's hope of escaping that, of finding peace and freedom. And I just started taking notes, and I probably wrote in my phone for not at that moment for a week, but over the next week, I took notes and fleshed out the idea. Usually whenever I do something like that, I'm like, man, you're crazy for thinking about a book. Writing books, it's insane.
Yeah, it's a process.
For me, it's as insane as trying to train for a marathon, and I'm not a runner, so that seems horrific. And writing books to me, even though I've written 5, seems horrible. So I parked it, and I thought I'm going to let it sit for 6 months. I'm going to come back to it and see if it's still something I'm passionate about that I can really run with. And I came back to it 6 months later, and there it was. And I thought, man, I've got a really great idea for a novel. And within 6 months, I had it written. I mean, it was up at 5 a.m. every morning. It's just this discipline, cadence and rhythm of writing. And weekends, it was like 8 to 10 hour writing sessions. And so, yeah, the first book was just amazing. The reception, it came out in 2021. The reception was overwhelming. Everyone, not everyone, but almost everyone who's read it has resonated with it because, like I said, it's kind of 3 levels. It's a page turner in one sense. It's hopefully a very compelling story that's very engaging and interesting. Below that, there's the allegorical part that all of us can relate to. I'm not going to share any details of it because there's some interesting finds or interesting things within the book that people will want to pick out. And I'll let them do that when they read it. But then below that surface, I don't really go in too much of this, but it's autobiographical. It's my story. It's therapy for me. Writing this, I haven't really gone to a therapist or a counselor in the past, but we're all kind of working through things, and writing seems to be one of those avenues, especially with this novel, where I was able to pour out whatever. I don't want to be as extreme as saying trauma, but if we call it trauma, then it's been a way for me to work through some of that. I wouldn't say traumatic in a relative sense. Maybe the issues that I've gone through, but it was a way to work it out. So
writing can be so cathartic. I mean, when I was writing, there were times that I didn't even know that I had stuff to heal until I started writing about it. And I started filling up with emotion going, oh, wow, I was not expecting this to approach. But you do have a safety net because it's fiction. So you have that little barrier there to say, okay, I can jump a little bit farther because it is fiction, right?
Well, and I think in some sense, if you're writing nonfiction and telling about yourself, autobiographically, there's a profound sense of vulnerability that you have to overcome, right?
Huge.
Because you are just sharing everything. And I think in fiction, you're able to work through a lot of the emotions and deep issues, emotions that you have without really revealing too much. And I think, and plus doing that publicly keeps you from, putting people on the spot who may have hurt you in the past, and keeps a certain level of
anonymity
to it. Absolutely. But let me
Some
say,
wouldn't choose that though. Some would be like, let's blast them.
I guess it just depends on what your intention is, for sure. My intention is really never to blast people so much. I feel like that I'm always kind of pointing the finger inward and saying, where's, what else do I need to work out here? And so for me, the first book really took one step in that direction. I'll jump to the second book, but rather than jumping into like the narrative, the story of it, and kind of continuing this thought of things being autobiographical and therapeutic in some sense, it was interesting because I felt like the first novel, no one's going to be able to pick this out while they're reading it. Okay. I don't want people to think, well, golly, if we buy Brandon's novel, then it's just going to be a therapy where he's working through his issues.
Therapy.
It's not that at all.
Yeah.
But I will say with the second one, the first one is, it's me working through my life up to the present point of 2019, 2020. So really
like
from the beginning of
slant.
I'm sorry.
Like a deconstruction type working through?
I think so. Okay. Sure. And then whenever I was contemplating a sequel, I thought I want to be as thoughtful with the second one as I was the first. And so at one level, you want a compelling story. And then below that, you want to say something. I wanted to say something allegorically about, I had more things to say that I hadn't said in the first. And then thirdly, I wanted to focus on the autobiographical therapeutic stuff. And so I thought, well, I've done everything up to this point. Like, what am I working through now? And I thought it's interesting because in one sense, I was working through a lot of religious fundamentalism up to that point of my life, and just kind of working through the feelings and emotions of that, and maybe even a little bit some of the resentments of different things. But then I thought, man, I've kind of escaped one element on the ideological spectrum, and then there's this other ideological spectrum that swings the other way in a more progressive way. But I noticed that in a lot of ways that it had become as fundamentalist in some ways as the other side. And I thought, I feel like that in myself, I can't even be my authentic self without fear of now this side. Right. Earlier, it was one side, then it's the other side. And I've always probably been too liberal for conservatives, but I'm probably too conservative for liberals, and which is maybe a good place to be. But it also gets you in trouble a lot, too, with both sides. So I think with the second book, I thought there are some things that I want to say to the other end of the spectrum, of it's okay to critique one side, but then what are you becoming yourself? And I think that that's the key. The answer isn't in a new, finding more things to be right about, right? It's not a mental assent toward anything. It has to be a heart transformation of something. And I think that was the critique in the second book, and really what I wanted to work toward.
So what do you think you learned from this? I mean, you're on the other side. You set out on this. What did you learn?
I don't know if it was about learning so much as how I'm feeling, and the freedom and peace of finding that space between, of not being controlled by fear, not being controlled by narratives, at least trying not to be controlled by narratives, of not being controlled by power figures or dogma or ideological constraints. And that doesn't mean that I've perfectly found it. It just means that I've spent 4 years of my life writing these books, working through all of
Yeah.
these issues to a place where I feel like I can breathe a little bit. I mean, even though I feel like that everything is burning around me, I have a little bit more peace in the middle of all of that. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that I've mentally learned anything, but maybe my heart's learned something new.
Healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know that anyone can be middle of the road on social media at this point. It's we argue about what color an orange is at this point. It's ridiculous. And I
Yeah.
mean, recently I've stopped and say, okay, if you're looking for a win here, I'm not going to talk to you. It
Right.
can't be a win-lose situation, a discussion both people learn. So just having that fear. I remember writing the last chapter of my book, crying and shaking, going, I can't say this shit. I can't say this shit. And now
Right.
years later, I'm like, yeah, I'm saying it, so there is a growth in it. There's a acceptance and some type of power to be able to share yourself that way, to say, look, I'm
That's right.
writing from my soul and I'm going through the process while I do it.
And I'll tell you what's really bizarre about fiction. And keep in mind, I'd never been a fiction writer up until 2019.
Yeah,
And so I was learning a lot of things, not just mechanically about how to write fiction. And I think I had kind of a sense of how to tell story. But one of the most fascinating things about it is that we'll just use one of my characters in both books. Her name was Sophia, and she's an older woman. And of course, Sophia means wisdom. And so this is a guiding wisdom of many of the characters. And it's almost like that you can, as a writer, transplant yourself out of yourself to become that character,
totally.
to
Yeah.
learn how to speak to yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so you're it's almost a disembodied experience where you're taking on new skin to tell yourself something. And especially in that instance where, maybe I was embodying a character of wisdom, that it's imparting wisdom real time to me as I'm writing, which was just a surreal
What a
meta
cool thing.
experience. Right. The other thing, this really doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking, but another really interesting learning is that I just thought, when I was writing about these characters, there were times where I kind of knew the narrative arc, but I wasn't sure where the characters were going to make decisions within that arc.
Mhm.
And it made me really pause, because I thought, there were times, this is really, really weird. There are times when I was hoping and wanting for a character, but because they had their own autonomy, they had to make decisions differently than what I really wanted them to. Is that crazy?
I hear that a lot from fiction writers, though, about how their
Yeah.
characters invade their dreams, invade their life, fight with them and go, no, I'm not doing that.
I
I mean,
know. Yes.
it really does. I mean, talk about theater of the mind, right? I mean, that's what
Yeah.
reading is. And then when you are creating that, I spent about 15 minutes trying to think of a fiction book, and 15 minutes was enough for me. I was like, can't do all these characters. It got so
Right.
overwhelming for me. I was like, let me just stick to what I know. I'm creative, but I can't character create at that point.
Yeah. Honestly, like I said earlier, from the outside looking in, it seems to me, especially just writing a book, but especially writing fiction, it's not something that I would necessarily sign up for. But because, I mean, I start losing sleep, I become anxious and manic and crazy
Wow.
thinking about it, because these characters stay with you and you're wrestling with them. And but they
Wow.
have their own autonomy, and they
Yeah.
have to make the decisions that they have to make. And sometimes I grieve. It's weird, because in some sense, you think creator and created, creator created, and it's like you have your own autonomy within this narrative arc, and it's like, wow, meta, meta, meta. Here we go.
Yeah, and then you play
Very
into how
bizarre.
God looks at all of that and say,
That's
okay,
exactly right.
this must be very similar type of thing.
It's bizarre, but anyway, I've gone too far on that. But yeah,
So what do you want people to get out of this? Do you want it to be a relaxing weekend read at the beach? Do you want it to be earth shaking and shake up people's lives? What are you looking for?
yeah, it's kind of the anti-beach read.
Okay.
People who read it, like there's been a few different ways people have approached it. Some people have read it for the story and left it there, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have read it and they're like, oh wow, every paragraph, every sentence, every word means something. There's that much intentionality with it. And so I've met with people who filled up notebooks of notes, highlighted, underlined the book because
Wow.
I really, I mean, it's kind of me though. I'll say that I don't read a whole lot, which is kind of weird, but I do watch television a ton and I study how they tell story. And Breaking Bad is my favorite television show of all time, and I appreciate like everything means everything in those shows. Every angle of the camera, every placement of a prop, every song that's played, everything means something. And I thought I want to take that level of detail and intentionality into what
Yeah.
I'm writing. And so I think in another sense, it's deep enough where people can let it they can take it to a deeper heart level, a deeper soul level, and let it resonate with them. And ultimately, these are books of I hope I mentioned the word earlier. I hope they're books of wisdom, of
Yeah.
healing, of people um, challenging we versus they thinking, challenging the way that we assume so much about each other and really challenge because I know one of the things that I spent a lot of time on is working through the thought process of even the antagonist where you're in a real pickle because I've painted this person as an antagonist, as the big bad. And then you're kind of torn because you're like, man, there's some empathy, there's
Mhm.
compassion here
That's the
for
best kind
what's
of antagonist, though.
later revealed. And especially in And So by Fire. So the first book's What Can't Be Hidden. The second one is And So by Fire. In the second one, I thought that the day in which we live right now is so polarized, but I want people to see in every one of my characters just I'm going to make it very difficult. I'm going to make every character gray. Even the protagonist, I'm going to show some dark. Even the antagonist, there's some light. And it's challenging people to go beyond assumptions, go beyond what label the media narrative is, or just the narrative in general. And the second book especially deals with things that we're dealing with contemporaneously, like misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, artificial intelligence to an extent. I'm really careful because I don't want to lose the most important thing is the story and the relationships and what we're trying to get out of them. I don't want people to get lost in it becoming a science fiction book, but
Mm.
there's just so much relevance to especially the second book because it's what we're dealing with right now and how narratives shape how we see, how we relate, and work to divide us. And I have characters weaving in and out of that, and hopefully through it, causing us to rethink a few things of how we. And maybe the goal is to rediscover our humanity. Maybe that's the goal.
Well, I mean, our society, especially on social media, is so surface. Um, you know, I next week we're having a show on allyship because there are times I just don't even know what to say. If I say, well, I have black friends, oh my God, I sound like a Karen. You know? There are things that I can't say because of the way I look and because of the way I will be judged. And the same goes for everybody else out there.
That's
There's an
right.
automatic dismissal for information, for dialogue, for all of those things because it's so superficial. Because we're looking at it, well, all of a sudden, if I say something, well, then I'm being anti Semitic. People don't know me and they're calling me anti Semitic because of that surface level thing. So if we don't see humanity, if we don't go beyond that screen name and that profile picture, we're doomed. We're doomed. We're going to just
We
totally
are.
be prejudiced against everybody.
We are an anti. We are the anti-contemplative society.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
are going. We are going the wrong. We are screeching and screaming in the wrong direction. And if any of your listeners appreciate Richard Rohr, I would say that these books are the fictional Richard Rohr.
oh wow. I love Richard
They're
Rohr.
Richard Rohr-esque. I should say that. I don't want to make it sound like that I'm Richard Rohr writing fiction books, but they have
You're going to get
a.
a letter after that one.
It would be an honor to be considered that highly, but yeah, that's the thing is that the systems we've created and the things that we preoccupy ourselves with keep us right there on the surface, right?
Yeah.
And everything requires such a snap judgment, and it requires, um, yeah, it
Well, there's
requires,
an entitlement to voice too, right? I mean,
yeah,
people think that they are entitled to their opinions, whether they're valid or not. And that
mm,
entitlement also is superficial. So again, it's all on this very, very thin layer of humanity and forgetting about all of that, forgetting that there's children involved, there's families, there's mothers that love these children.
see, now you're tapping into it, right? I mean, that's the thing is that and hopefully that's what I do with these books is that there's always so many things pulling at a person. There's so many considerations. Not every answer is simple. I mean, it's just that simple. Not every answer is simple, and not every decision is what we necessarily assume it really
Yeah.
is. Like what's behind it, the motivation behind it, and man, if I can just be a small part of helping our culture just pause and just breathe
Yeah.
and just think and contemplate and consider and not to rush to assumptions. It would be like I would consider that one of the greatest honors of my life is to just be a part of reversing, subverting the trend, right?
Oh,
Reversing it in
huge.
some way. Yeah. Ooh,
Huge.
woo. Tall task.
Yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, either people assume that you're automatically bad or you're automatically good. I just finished The Boys. Have you seen the Boys series?
I haven't.
It's about when superheroes go wrong. And the
Oh yeah.
whole
Oh.
thing is about how we elevate people because of their popularity, because of all this. And then we give them a voice that isn't really even valid. And they're still human. There's,
Woo.
yeah. I mean, it was like, wow, there was so many layers to this. And then the superhero actually quotes Trump and Bush. There was all kinds of like, wow. But when we lose that humanity, when we forget that everyone's flawed as well as good, we totally remove all of the gray areas. You are, and I'm not talking about race, but black and white.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
is
yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
gray in the middle to say, okay, there's someone that is really bad, but someone still loves them. Someone
Mhm.
still wakes
Mhm.
up every morning hoping to hear their voice. And forgetting that aspects of humanity is numbing us, all of us, to just say the nasty things that are on the internet.
It does, and you add depersonalization with social media and technology into it, and it's just exacerbated it. And I think, man, at some level, I mentioned it earlier, but at some point, it has to take intentionality to stop the trajectory. And
Yeah.
right now, it just seems like that. hopefully there are more voices realizing it. Hopefully there are more people saying, man, this not only does this not help us thrive and grow, um, I think it keeps us at a level that's just subhuman. I mean, forget
Yeah.
about flourishing.
Yeah.
We're operating at a very subhuman level right now, and
No intentionality. Like you said, it's just going through the motions, I really think we're a bunch of frogs in a pot about to boil. It's, it
you
is,
got it.
I go on Twitter and I'm like, I just can't even take this shit. It's so negative. It's so crazy. And no one is looking for more information. No one is saying, am I right? Am I wrong? They are going in to say, no, I'm right. And here's where I prove it. And it's just dividing us even further. Our
Yeah,
community is gone in the US.
yeah. Yeah, so I think with this second book, hopefully the way it ends asks profound questions about that exact thing. Um, because ultimately I don't think that I wanted to say, you know, here's the ending. It's happily ever after. We figured it out, and this is the solution. I think it's going to take some wrestling on people's part. Maybe the ending asks a couple of questions, like where are we in this? Who are you in this?
Yeah.
And I think the best maybe the best books are the ones that do that. I I don't know. I don't necessarily like. I'm not anti tie everything up in a bow and make it perfect, but I think you definitely want to challenge people to wrestle with who they are in the story. And certainly at the end of the second book, And So by Fire, the sequel, there's resolution, but it begs the question: where are you in this? And I'm not going to get into it any more than that, but I do see some comments, and I would like to
Everybody's saying
say
hi to you.
good evening to people, and certainly good evening to Saint Sherry. And hey, Carl, how are you doing? Good to
The
see
Saint
you.
Sherry is from David. You will get a friend request from him, and he calls me Saint Sherry.
That's perfect.
So where do
Yeah,
you want it to go from here? Are these characters still talking to you, or are they put asleep for now? Are you feeling another book and you have more to say, or did
no,
this really do it?
this is it for this
Okay.
particular, and so they would call this a duology instead of a trilogy. So it'd be a
Mm-hmm.
two-ology. It really is perfect for what I envisioned. The Even if people look at the covers of the book, in the first book, What Can't Be Hidden, it's the protagonist, Thura, and she's underwater lying horizontally. In the second book, it's Fire, and she's standing up vertically. And people can read into that all that they want, but and in another sense, if I'm going to critique both sides of the ideological spectrum, then it has to be two books as well.
Yeah.
I would be doing a disservice to try to do, but I will tell you that if I get signed on for a television show based upon these books, I will be happy to write as many books
There
or
you go.
seasons as they would like.
I'm
But
in LA. I'll
no,
hook you up.
it's very intentional the way that it ended up, and honestly, I couldn't be more proud of these books and
Fantastic.
these characters, and certainly they're the best things that I've ever done in terms of writing. I appreciate my nonfiction, and I'm glad that I did them, but to me, these are, I mean, everybody has their own personal goals of what they want to
Of course.
accomplish, and I think, man, to me, this stands as one of my best accomplishments, is giving the people these two books.
Again, I have been in a writers group for years, and the fiction writers just blow my mind. So I
Mm,
can't even imagine the processes that you went through and talking through. I mean, it's a level of genius that I just don't have. So,
mm,
I mean, to be able to add your story and the allegory behind it and get a message out concisely and beautifully, you should be honored. You did a
yeah, I
fantastic
appreciate
job.
that. Yeah, I went back the other day. I was cleaning up my office, and I grabbed the stack just for this book because I did all handwritten notes on everything and
Yeah.
notebooks and scratch pieces of paper, and I thought there had to be a method to the madness, but I took it all out. And I mean, you're just dealing with a massive stack. And it's funny because it's like, oh yeah, I had that note on that one weird piece of paper, and somehow you kind of know where it's all at. And the
Yeah.
number of things the number of ideas that I had that I ended up scratching out, or the ones that I kept. And yeah, it almost felt, what's that movie with Russell Crowe? It kind of felt like that, where he's doing the numbers and the math and
Oh yeah.
a brilliant
Yeah, I know
mind.
what you're
Even though I'm not calling myself a brilliant mind, I'm just saying it felt as
right.
chaotic as that in
Well,
the
like I
process.
said, you have to be. Don't sell yourself short. You are, to be able to handle this and to get a fiction book out that even makes sense. Again, you should be honored.
Well,
Russell Crowe
COVID
has
helped.
pretended to be
COVID
that. You're
certainly
doing it.
helped expedite the process because
What's
you didn't
that?
have much else to do. I said COVID certainly helped the process because
Yeah.
most people, creatives especially, were just pounding out material. That was one of the funny things about the first book, is that I finished it in like April of 2021. That can't be right.
Okay.
Anyway, I had to wait for a year because so many people had written books during that time.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting. So it had technically been done, but just had to wait a long time.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, I mean, just so awesome to share it with you guys. And I know I'm really sparse on the actual narrative and the story, but it's so different. It's a little bit easier to talk about these books now, staying at this level, but you just don't want to get on and talk about the story because everything is a spoiler, especially in these books. And I would be doing everyone a disservice if I got too much into the story and told them
Of
what was
course.
going to happen.
Of course. Do you have to read the first one before the second one? Is it that, or can they just pick up And So by Fire and know what's going on? It
I'm
is
not sure
truly a
because
duology.
I'm so close. I think you'd be doing a disservice if you just chose one over the other. There's a part of me that there's so much relevance in the second book to what we're dealing with right now that I would almost want people just to buy it to read that. But I'm afraid without the context behind it, there are things that wouldn't be as powerful. So, I mean, you'd certainly understand the story, but I don't think that emotional, visceral thing would be happening as you read. So, I mean, they could probably go out and I think at this point get both books together for $25.
Oh,
So
good.
it's and also I've had many people, I think, I'm trying to think of who, I've had several people say they probably should have been just one book because of the way that they were written. But I couldn't do that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just too much,
People have
guys.
told
Come
me,
on.
people have told me my books should be 5 books. And no, it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
No, it's not going to happen. Yeah. So what was your favorite part in each of the books?
I have a lot of favorite parts, which is, I don't know if that's usual or not for an author to like different parts of what they've
I
written,
think
but
so.
I have this one where I thought it was really clever in the first book. The character I mentioned earlier, Sophia, she comes back to one of the main protagonists of the book, and he's leaning up against a tree, and he's contemplating different things, and she's just a character, man. She is sassy. She is, an old woman, hobbles around, but she is sassy, and she walks up and hands him a stick and starts walking away, and he's like, what do you want me to do with this? And she said, get up. And she said, I want you to take the stick and draw a circle around the perimeter of this tree. And so he draws this large circle, and she said, now go sit down. So he sits down, and she just walks away. He's like, what is going on? She comes back a few minutes later, and he's sitting there, and she says, he's like, what in the world are we doing? And she said, tell me what you saw. And he's like, was I looking for something? So she I think she's the one who drew the circle, but nonetheless, she takes the stick and she draws a circle that's within that circle, a little bit closer to him. And she said, "Now I want you to pay attention." And she leaves again. And Carl says it's one of his favorite
Yeah.
parts. So she leaves, and so he's like, "All right." He's pretty frustrated, but he's looking around. He's like, "I got to have something." So he's like, "All right." She comes back. He said, "I saw some leaves. I saw some insects moving." And she's like, "All right, it's a good start." And she walks away again, and he's just flabbergasted. And she comes back the next, or she had drawn an even closer circle and leaves. And when she comes back the last time, he's like, hands up in the air, what's going on? And ultimately, where we get with this story is that um, he finally understands that this exercise that she's doing is going to keep going until he draws the circle right here.
Oh, wow.
And because his focus had always been so outward and other, and the wisdom of it was that she was forcing him within each concentric successive circle to start looking closer and closer. One, to just start looking in general, to start looking at your surroundings and appreciating. And I think that he thought that he got it, because he's like, "Man, I lifted up some leaves and I saw the insects below them, and I saw the fruit that had fallen, and I was thinking about all of the animals that must have eaten here over all these generations." And she's like, "All right, yeah, you didn't get it." And then he's like, "What do you mean?" And so finally, he finally says, "If I finally realized that if I kept drawing these circles, eventually they'd be around my heart, and it's the place that she needed him to look." And that was the first place in this story where his focus had finally turned to himself, and he realized that there was something here that needed his attention.
I always say the onus is on us.
Yeah, it absolutely is. In the second book, one of the protagonists is lying underneath of a vehicle, and she's grieving. And I don't want to say too much, but there's a character that is kind of this elusive character in this town, and she could hear some movement behind her. Her back was to the sidewalk, and he sits down some buckets and starts scrubbing the ground. There was some blood on the ground, and she continues to lie there. And ultimately, he stops what he's doing, and he comes over and lies down beside her, and he puts his hand on her shoulder because he knows that she's in pain and hurting, and he says, "Is there anything more than this?" And I know it doesn't have much context, but I will say that in the second book, there's such a lack of personal connection. Everybody's so isolated. Everyone's lost in these simulated experiences, this life where it's so antagonistic, and there's just not a whole lot of intimacy or connectedness or human relationship. And it's like this one time where it's just the simplicity of the moment where, human touch, and he understands her pain, and she's grieving. And the reason he says, "Is there anything more than this?" is because the answer to our profound suffering is, and here we go, being very Roar-like, is the two greatest teachers is our great suffering and great love. And in that moment, her great suffering is teaching her one thing, but then that profound love that's meeting her there is moving her in a very meaningful way. And I think that's the pivotal moment for her in the story, where she can finish out to the end. But yeah, I'd say for both, again, there's not a whole lot of context to either one of those stories, but hopefully people can see that there is something deep and meaningful with them.
Well, that's what books are for, right? To open our mind, to ask difficult questions, to take us to other places, and just broaden everything about us. It's also the cheapest way to travel.
Yeah, I agree. No, kind of going back to your question earlier, like, is this a beach read? Is this, that's the thing, is that I don't want to say this and have people make insinuations about it, but it's almost like that it's a profound theology that is embodied, that's easy to relate to, where a person can read these books and hear deep human truths about ourselves without having to engage difficult text. How about if I say it that way?
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, again, just because you put all of this effort in to develop all of these characters, I think it's going to go really far. And Carl is already giving his blessings all over the place.
Carl's been really awesome, and I know that he's done really great work with writing both fiction and nonfiction. And
he's a great friend of mine. Yeah. End of the shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been discussing just the mechanics of writing, and just, you know, and I think that this is one thing I'll say is that I don't know if people sit around and think about fiction much, but let me back up. Okay. I live in Columbus, Indiana. People probably don't know anything about Columbus, Indiana. It is one of the architectural wonders of the United States. Not a joke. It's probably like the number six. It's the number 6 most architectural city in the United States.
Wow.
World-renowned architects have come here a long time ago and built everything in town. Our schools, our jails, our churches, everything.
Wow.
There was a film that came out 5 years ago called Columbus, and it was directed by Kogonada. It had John Cho, Haley Lou Richardson, a lot of, it's this beautiful film. And I was taken by it, not just because it was a film filmed here in my town about architecture, and it wasn't a documentary, it's an actual film and story, but the intentionality of the director Kogonada of every single shot that he had was telling a story just as much as the narrative. And I thought it's just it was kind of Breaking Bad-esque. There's an intentionality that goes with it. So last year they were back in town, and they had it was like the 5-year anniversary, and they were talking to a small group of people who came to listen. And afterwards I was able to go up and talk to him. And of course I didn't have my stupid book with me, because he asked about it, because I was asking him questions. He's like, how do you know so much about like what I'm doing here? And I'm like, well, I write, I pay attention to that stuff. So he's like, give me a pitch on your book. I'm like, hubba hubba.
Yeah, of course, right?
And my wheels are just spinning, and I just was a fool, and I regret it. I carry my book with me everywhere I go now, because I'm like, if I'm ever in a situation again. But anyway, one of the things that I told him, I said, I think we're at a point right now with art, and I said he's a great example of it, is that the next, and maybe people have been here for a long time and I'm just now discovering. I don't want to act like that I'm inventing something, but it has to be intentional art with a greater intention. And I know that people would say that, because certainly I've heard people talk about even the architecture in Columbus, about the inspiration behind it. But I think that's the stuff that has to speak. That's the stuff that we need right now. Getting caught up in the Instagram era of just walking around, say, Columbus, and taking photos and putting it on Instagram of all the architecture misses the sacredness, the holiness, the intention, the inspiration, the passion, all of the things. And I think, man, if we can just get back to a place where we're recovering that. Can I tell you one more quick story?
Of course.
I was at my local bookstore. They were so helpful and so supportive of me. I was in there talking to one of the ladies working, and she asked me what books I'm currently reading. And I told her a couple, and I said, but I honestly just don't read a lot of books. I'm a slow reader. I don't get through many books per year. I really don't read. I read hardly at all, believe it or not. And she said that she's probably 60 years old. She said, I've noticed that with social media and phones, she said, my own attention span has shrunk so much.
Yeah.
She said, I'm having a hard time reading books because I'm preoccupied and thinking about or checking or whatever. And I looked at her and I said, man, it's just that's tragic, because if it's doing it to us at this
Yeah.
maybe a little bit older generation, then what is it meaning for younger generations? And I think we've got to figure out a way to bring back intentionality, contemplation, space, reflection. We've got to have an intentionality around recovering inspiration and passion and beauty and all the things, and not just cheapen it, not just squander it and eat it and poop it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I can't, I really, I know you sent me, in fact, you're a perfect example. I can't read books on my computer.
I know.
There is so much
That's right.
distraction. There is, my ADD starts kicking in. I go, give me a book though, and I could shut the whole world out. You know, I really need that tangible thing to say, okay, for my mind, I'm going to divulge into this book right now.
That's right.
But making it with technology, I mean, perhaps I've never tried a Kindle, but you know, on the computer, I can't do it. I was just talking to Keith this week, like saying, don't send me a PDF. I have 100% rate of not reading PDFs. I can't. I mean, I want to, I try, I do all of these things, but as soon as I start reading the PDF,
it's gone.
The email alarm goes off, my social media goes off, something, and all of a sudden it's an hour later and I am out of the book. But some people really need that. A friend of mine and I were talking about it, Michelle, she might even be watching. She said she needs the computer to read it because of the eye issues and all of those things.
For sure.
So at this point in our lives, because of the attention span, we kind of got to cater to all of them and say, you know, whatever, how you consume, you need to be able to consume it that way. Because I mean, TikTok, 24 seconds. Our attention span is down to 24 seconds at this point. It's ridiculous.
Oh, I agree.
And then add ADD to it, and we're all on drugs. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. Brandon, share some of your wisdom with us as your final words.
I think that last one was my final word. I thought that was dropping some pretty good nuggets here. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I don't need to say more.
I have a bunch of stuff to show the audience as to where they can find you. Again, everybody, thank you so much for putting up with my tech issues today. What Can't Be Hidden is the first book. And So by Fire is the second. And you can find all the information on Brandon and all of his works at his website.
And one thing I will say, if the audience will indulge me, is that I've kind of taken an unorthodox approach with both of these books on this launch. The bookstore that I mentioned in my hometown, Viewpoint Books, I've just had all of my people, I've mobilized all of the forces to just get the book from them, because it's a signed copy and they ship. And do you mind if I give their phone number?
Not at all. Spread it everywhere.
It's 812-376-0778. And they're nicer than Amazon. And they ship and they're signed. And, you know, I'm nothing against people who want to get it from Amazon. I'm cool with it, you getting it anywhere. But I just really wanted to support my friends and local business. And another bookstore that I'm going to this weekend to do a signing, they are selling their entire shop at the end of this year, and it just breaks my heart. They're trying to
they're selling their business. Oh wow. Okay. Wow.
Business. So so I just want to make sure that we can do what we can to help the bricks and mortar and the moms and pops and all that. So
fantastic. Send me that number and email, and I will post it to the YouTube description and the Facebook and all of that, and get them some publicity.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Brandon, thank you so much. It was truly an honor to talk to you. I'm going to go ahead and send you backstage and see you in a second.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, a live show, we all just got to go with the flow. So sorry I was looking down for most of the show. I actually wanted to look at Brandon while he spoke his wonderful words. Go get the book. Tell me what you think. Send me an email. Send Brandon an email. Send us the reviews, post it on Amazon, and show support for all of our guests. Okay, next week, as I mentioned, we are talking about allyship and how to truly be an ally out there in the world without sounding like a Karen or a Chad or anything else, the derogatory names out there. So check it out. We're going to have a great show. As always, have a wonderful week and walk in love. Okay, so figure this out. Okay, bye. Mwah.